So it's a pleasure to be here today. I hope you guys enjoy your lunch and I can keep you a little bit awake here for the presentation. This is a talk that I really enjoy giving. It's something that I actually hold near and dear to my heart because I grew up on a small farm. And I think there are some definite challenges in front of us for small dairy operations, but I do think there's a future here. And I want to talk to you about some of the things that hopefully can help you if you're a small farm in surviving and being competitive moving forward. So I did grow up on a dairy farm in Kentucky, and I've been working with dairy cows my whole life. Lee, where's Lee? This thing isn't. I've been working with dairy cows my whole life. I grew up on a 65 cow dairy, so my paradigm is the small dairy, and I think about that way, and I think about those small operations, and work a lot with the Amish and Mennonites in Kentucky over the years, and I do get to work with dairies of all sizes now. So I travel the country, and so one week I might be working with a 40 cow dairy, and one week I might be working with 10,000 cow dairy. So I see a lot of differences now. But one of the things that I see is a lot of the strategies that are employed and used by our larger dairies can be used by small dairies. And that's part of what I want to talk to you today about. Just forward the slide in the meantime. No? Okay. So one of the things that has always been a lot of interest to me is taking business management principles and applying them to the dairy operation. I've always enjoyed economics and numbers, and you can see, okay, now we can go back a slide maybe. I actually used to have hair, so you recognize some of the other people in the room seem to have struggled with this also of the loss of hair over the years, and contrary to the picture here, you might think now that you see this is a presentation about how to increase your body condition score, but that's not what I'm doing here. If we want to have that talk, I'll be happy to give that to you. I have some great hints on how to increase your body condition score as a human. But I've always been interested in cows and data. That's me in high school. That's my grandfather back at our home dairy farm in Kentucky. Before I go too far into this, I always want to make sure and make sure you guys know that I'm not delusional, that I do understand the realities that are in front of us in terms of small operations. And when you look at the slides and you look at the number, you see, of course, that the cost of production and the margins are higher as we get larger. That's just the reality of what we see. And it doesn't matter what year we look at this, we're always going to see this kind of a trend. One of the questions that you probably are asking is, am I a small dairy? What is a small dairy? We could spend a lot of time trying to debate and argue about what is a small dairy. I'm going to basically say, if you're not shipping a full tanker load of milk a day, you're a small dairy. And I would say that it's probably bigger than that. I was on a dairy a few weeks ago, 1,200 cows, talking about how they as a small dairy didn't think that they were as competitive at 1,200 cows. So regardless, I think most of the dairies in Kentucky, Tennessee fit the small dairy definition. And the principles I'm going to talk about, even if you are a larger dairy, will still apply. One of the things that I'm quite passionate about is reading more than just dairy. How many people read some of the publications that you see on the left? Forage Dairyman, Dairy Herd Management, Progressive Dairyman. Anybody read those? A lot of us read those. Now, how many of you read Harvard Business Review, Business Week, Fortune? I see a couple hands going up. I'm here to tell you I think we should be reading some of these publications on the right. Now, Harvard Business Review sounds really scary, right? Because we think Harvard must be way above me. Harvard has this image with it. But actually, Harvard Business Review is a wonderful publication. It's not a review. It's very practical information about managing your business. They're short articles. They're written at a layman's level to think about how we manage businesses. And we are managing businesses as dairies. And I think there's a lot that we can learn if we take principles from other businesses and we bring them into our dairy farm. So the first thing I say is I think we should read more than just our dairy magazines. And one of the books that I read that really inspired me to think about things a little bit differently was this book called Small Giants. Small Giants is a business management book, and the basic concept behind Small Giants is looking and studying companies that choose to be great instead of big. Because we know, as we look across the world and we look across the country, there are a lot of businesses outside of agriculture that have been quite successful and still maintain their small size. Maybe a restaurant, for example, that you can think about in your local community that has done a wonderful job maintaining itself as a small business. And we see now, even in bigger cities, more of this movement away from the chain-based restaurants back to local-based restaurants. So what's this opportunity for us in agriculture? What's the opportunity for us in dairy? This book describes a lot of businesses that have done that, choosing to be great instead of big. What are the characteristics that are common among the businesses that they categorize as small giants? There are 6 characteristics they talk about. One of them is the leader factor. The leader factor basically means there needs to be someone in the business that's self-aware with a vision for the future. What is the vision for your operation? I think sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day, we get caught up in firefighting and just taking care of the day-to-day that we forget to think about the vision. And we need to make sure that there's somebody in the operation that is thinking long-term, thinking about the strategy of the business. The community factor. These businesses were rooted well within their local communities. I think this is something that in agriculture we're great at. We tend to be very active in our communities. If you look at local school boards, political boards, etc., we're very active in that. So I think that's something most of us are great at. The next factor, the employee factor. They had engaged and valued employees. This one's not so easy. And this one is something that I think in general we probably don't always do as well in agriculture, because we're in agriculture. Sometimes that's because we're introverts. I'm an introvert. Sometimes I'd rather be around a cow than a person. Anybody else like that? Yes, a whole room full of us. We became dairy farmers or agricultural business people because we didn't necessarily want to manage people. Yet we need to manage people. And when I talk about managing people, I'm not just talking about hired employees. I'm also talking about your family members. And family members are harder to manage than hired employees many times, right? But this means we have to make sure that those people recognize they're valued members of the team. And they need to be engaged in what we're doing. I think sometimes one of the big mistakes that we make is not describing and talking to our employees about what we're doing, where we're going, why we're doing what we're doing. The next factor that they describe as a key characteristic for a small giant is what they call the customer and supplier factor. These businesses have personal ties to both customers and suppliers. I think in dairy, we're really good at one of these and we're not good at the other. I think we're really good at having that personal tie to suppliers. Your nutritionists, your veterinarians, your AI companies, etc. You have a lot of great connections and relationships there. We don't always have that connection with the customer. And again, I think sometimes that's because we're not necessarily as interested in talking to some of those people. But I find it interesting to talk to people sometimes outside of the dairy industry. It's rare when I talk to people outside of the dairy industry, but when I do, I learn something. Because all of those people that are not in the dairy industry are at some level consuming our products. And I think it's important that we talk to them so that we have an understanding of where they're coming from. Because whether we agree with the customer or not, they're the ones making the decision about buying our products. So we need to maintain that connection with the customer. The next one is the margin factor. The small giants, the businesses that are successful with small operations, have some understanding of the margin and how they're going to make money as a business. There are different strategies that are successful in dairy. It's not a one-size-fits-all. but what is your business model and what is your strategy for making money? And the last factor that they talked about that was critical is what they call the passion factor. I love this phrase that they have the soul of an artist, but happen to be in business. And I think that describes many of you here today. You love being a dairy farmer. So the passion factor is there in many cases. If that passion factor is not there, maybe you need to step back and say, is this really what I should be doing? But most of us have that very well. So most people in this room probably have most of these 6 factors to start with as a base. Another thing they talk about is what they describe as mojo. Mojo is the corporate equivalent of charisma in a person. So what kind of mojo do you have as a dairy operation? And they describe 5 mojo elements. First of all, that desire to be the best. These businesses all had a desire to be the best at what they were doing. They needed to understand and know their business and their limitations, be responsive to consumer demands, build relationships, and make sure to stay privately held. That one's fairly easy for most of us. So these are factors, mojo elements that we need to think about to be a small giant. So the question that I have for you then is, how will you be great? I think that's the main thing to recognize if you're going to be a small giant, if you're going to be a successful small dairy, is you have to be great at something. You don't have to be great at everything, but there's a lot of different ways that we can be great. We could be great by having high production. We can be great by marketing genetics, doing on-farm processing. Maybe we go into grazing, organic, agritourism. Maybe we look at partnerships with other farmers. Look at what the Israelis do and the way that they work together in buying groups to control their cost. Doing contract heifer raising, contracting feed, and being very strategic about our investments. There are different ways that we can be great. But I don't think there's room anymore for 50 cow, 100 cow, 200 cow dairies that are average or below average. If you're going to survive and be successful and competitive in that size range, you've got to be really, really good at what you're doing. Part of this is having a focus on dairy business management. Every dairy producer is a CEO. What's a CEO? Chief Executive Officer. But the other piece that sometimes we forget about is that somebody in the operation is also the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, understanding the finance of the business that you're working with. We have to think about biology and economics simultaneously. There are a lot of variables in both those equations and a lot of uncertainty there. We need to recognize that we've not done a great job understanding financial and economic consequences of what's going on within our business. We do a good job with production numbers, not always with business size. Okay. Another thing we need to recognize is economies of size. Economies of size does matter, and it's just math. It's really just math. Simple example, if I have a $100,000 investment and I take that $100,000 investment for 50 cows, it's $2,000 per cow. If it's for 250 cows, it's $400 per cow, so on and so on. We cannot change this. This is just math. There's things we need to recognize, though, given that math is there. How many people know these 2 guys? Who's the tall guy? Manu Bowl. Who's the short guy? Muggsy Bogues. All right? Manu Bowl, one of the tallest, I think he was the tallest player ever to play in the NBA, 7'7". Muggsy Bogues, shortest player, 5'3". They played on the same team together. They had some differences there, right? We've got to recognize this is what we're up against. If we're a small operation, we're not going to be able to score well against this guy, if we're this guy. So we got to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot with our cost of production. Cost of production, we hear about it all the time, It's very important, but we can really mess that up if we're not strategic about investments. Let me give you an example. If we're just talking about the use of our parlor, these are some example calculations from a book that was written by my advisor for my master's degree. If we look at a full use parlor, this parlor is basically being used 24 hours a day, compared to one that's only used 12 hours a day or one that's used 6 hours a day. Don't worry about the math in the middle, but the cost of per hundredweight to harvest the milk, there's $2 a hundredweight difference there. So this starts us out at a competitive disadvantage. So the message here is that if you're a small dairy, you should be milking in a double one parlor, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. Although technically the double one would probably be the most efficient parlor, but you can't realistically do that. Why do I tell this story? Because too often when we are in good times, and of course I know we're not in good times right now, we look at an opportunity to improve our operation and we say, I want to build a parlor. Because what I want to do is I want to spend less time in the parlor. I was on a dairy a couple years ago that I worked with, helped them design a new barn for the cows to live in. And they said, this is working out great. Our production's up. We're making some more money. Now we want to build a new parlor. And I just went through their parlor. This is a herd that was milking 125 cows, and they had a double six parlor. And I said, why do you want to build a new parlor? And he said, wow, we're spending too much time in the parlor. It takes us 2 hours to milk twice a day. I don't want to spend 4 hours in the parlor. I want to get to where I'm down to 45 minutes per milking in the parlor. How many of you know people that made that kind of decision and then they couldn't make the payments to survive to pay for that parlor? A lot, right? They never built that parlor, but we do that because it makes things easier. But how much more revenue do we get in that case? If he would have gone from 2 hours a day to 45 minutes a day, how much does that increase his revenue? None. How much did it increase his costs? Probably $2 a hundredweight or more. We've got to be really cautious about capital investments because of this cost of production difference. What's the best way to lower your cost of production per hundredweight? That's a good way. Get out of business, that'll do it. Increase milk yield. We forget about this sometimes, but we see that cost of production per hundredweight. And the per hundredweight is the denominator there, right? So let's look and just look at a simple example here. So the orange line represents milk price, and in this example, it's $8 per hundredweight. The blue line represents the cost per cow per day, not per hundredweight, but per day. So in this case, we're about $11 per cow per day. This gray line represents our cost per hundredweight. So if we're at 50 pounds, our cost per hundredweight is $22 per hundredweight. We drop down here, we hit break even right around 60 pounds in this, and then we start gaining more money as the further we go down. So the higher our production goes, we eventually get to the point at 100 pounds, our cost of production is $11 per hundredweight. Our margin goes up. So down here at 50, 55 pounds, all the way up until about 68 or so, we're less than zero, and then we get up to the point where we're over 6. The best way to lower your cost of production per hundredweight is to increase your hundredweights. Now, you're saying to me, oh, Bewley, you're really stupid, which is fine. You can think that because I didn't change this line, okay? Just like you can't go from 50 to 100 pounds and not increase costs. That's true. So we look at this and we say, okay, we're going to have to pay more to get that more milk. So in this case, to go from 50 to 100, we increase our cost of production, our cost per day, from 11 to 15. The math still holds true. Now, the break even is higher, and we don't get as much opportunity at higher milk, but the math is still true. We, of course, have to think about if we're going to increase production, how are we going to do that? And if we spend $1, we want to make sure we're making $1 back. Try to find that sweet spot where we optimize that. Maybe it's not 100 pounds, maybe it's 70, maybe it's 80 pounds. But the bottom line is, it really benefits to get more production out of our animals. I know you guys have a few talks about this, so I'm not going to cover this in any detail, but I think this is really important for small dairy operations to really take advantage of this new margin program. I really think it's a good deal for small operations. We also need to recognize that financial records are just as important as production records. How many of you know the numbers on the left? Off the top of your head. You know these numbers, right? How many of you know the numbers on the right? Off the top of your head. Which numbers are more important? The ones on the left or the ones on the right? The ones on the right. Now, of course, they're both important. But why do we know these if these are more important? I'll tell you why. These are way more fun. We're cow people. It's a lot more fun to talk about these things. And these things have a huge impact on these numbers. But we don't do a good enough job understanding our profitability and cost of production measures. We need to do a better job with the financial records. We need to understand our cost of production. How many of you know your cost of production? How many of you, if somebody asks you what your cost of production is, the number that you give them is whatever you most recently read towards Dairyman? Probably most of us. We need to have an understanding of what our cost of production is. It's not an easy thing. It's not a fun thing to calculate cost of production. And I think sometimes we get worried because we're worried we're not going to do it quite right. To some degree, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is we have an understanding, and the journey is just as important as the destination. Going through the process of asking the questions and understanding the numbers is really, really critical. Unfortunately, we can't just give you a neat little spreadsheet and you plug 3 numbers in and you get your cost of production. That would be wonderful, but it's more complicated than that. It takes time. We need to recognize the value of the numbers going in affects what comes out. But remember, an attempt to calculate cost of production is better than not trying at all. I see 2 different types of investment categories that I work with dairy farms. I see things that we overinvest in and things that we underinvest in. What do we overinvest in? I think we overinvest in land sometimes. Land is a great asset, but land doesn't affect us until by investing too heavily in land. Toys. These toys might be green, they might be red, they might be blue, they might be tractors, they might be technology, they might be milking equipment, but we men in particular are bad at buying toys. And these toys tend to sink our business. Talked about parlors already. Sometimes it's labor and owner withdrawals. I think we spend too much money in the hospital pen, and we spend too much money culling cows out of the herd. Things I think we underinvest in: production, cow comfort, cow cooling, forage storage, transition cows, preventive health, and human resources. Now it's weird because I say on one side we spend too much, and then the other say we spend too little. What I mean is investing in your people, not paying them more, but training them and making sure that they're engaged in the operation. If you survey your employees, of course, everybody always wants to make more money, but job satisfaction, feeling like you're a part of something, is more important. So making sure that we deal with this and not just the pay is really critical. I think we have to do a better job in managing information. If we're going to try to manage something, we have to measure it. And I think that analytics can be our source of competitive advantage. The value of the numbers that we have just through DHI records is huge. How many times do I to a farm and I say, where's your latest DHI records? And I look over and there's a stack of green envelopes sitting there that high. And they've not been opened. That information is a lot of value. And there's a lot of things that we can glean from that information if we look at it. And if we look at the business world as a whole, people are doing a way better job in using analytics, new ways of looking at data to find new relationships and find new opportunities. And we can do this as small dairy operations. We see more and more use of data across dairy farms. The tendency is we fall into the trap of saying that only applies to the big guys. It doesn't apply to me. That's one of the worst things that we can say as a small dairy. That only applies to the big guys, not to me. There's only a few things that I think are key take-home messages from this talk. One of them is be great. The other one is business management and biology are not size dependent. Business management principles are the same whether we milk 50 cows or 50,000 cows. And biology is the same. We say, we shoot ourselves sometimes by saying, you know what, I'm not going to go visit that 2,000 cow dairy because I can't relate to what they do. I'm not going to read that article from that 2,000 cow dairy because I can't relate to what they do. But the biology of the animal is the same. I travel the world. I get to see dairies all over the world. And that cow, she looks the same everywhere. My mom gets mad at me. She says, Jeffrey, you get to go to this place and then you post pictures on Facebook of cows and they look the same whether you're in Europe or Africa or New Zealand or the US. Why do you post all these pictures the same? They are kind of the same. They're really cool to me. I don't care what my mom says. But the biology is the same. The same techniques that we see applied in large dairies, we can bring to our small dairies. And that includes data. That includes finances. I think there's a lot of modern benefits that we miss in our small dairies. We can fully utilize those records. We can analyze the information to really figure out where there's opportunities. We can take advantage of monitoring technologies, the wearable technologies, the parlor-based technologies, genomic testing, negotiating semen pricing. I see a huge issue as I work with dairies now. I see a lot of dairies still paying $18, $20 a unit for semen that's 5, 6 years out of date. There's a lot of new sources of semen. Did you know you can buy semen on Amazon? How many of you buy semen on Amazon? It's a great business model because they don't have any people. They take advantage of an existing network. You can go on Amazon, you can buy semen. $8 a unit for bulls that are over $900 net merit. Good stuff. So, should you pay $8 merit semen or $18 for $500 net merit semen? How many want to pay more for less? Not many people say that, but I see a lot of people doing it. We can take advantage of some of these same things. Forward contracting, margin protection programs. I see a lot of people raising and managing and storing their forages 1980s style. Uncovered silage bunks. Not doing a good job managing the face of the silage bunk. Comparison shopping of inputs. Taking advantage of new ways of buying things. Purchasing in bulk with neighbors. Some of the best small dairies that I work with, 4 or 5 of them sitting around the table, and they say, you know what? You use an iodine pre-dip. I use an iodine pre-dip. We all use an iodine pre-dip. I bet we can get a better deal out of it if we all go in together and buy it. And you know what? I can't order enough units of that Amazon semen by myself, but if all of us go in together, we can get a pretty good deal on it. We got to think about things like that because there's a huge opportunity to get some of those cost savings there. I see a lot of challenges with vaccination programs that are out of date, not taking advantage of some of the newer vaccination programs, not taking advantage of the latest in cow comfort. Simple things we can do to where our cows can be just as comfortable on a 50 cow dairy as a 5,000 cow dairy. And then again, not prioritizing dry and fresh cows. Huge area we miss out on small operations. Cows, the priority on large operations, and they tend to still be deprioritized in our smaller operations. There are things we have a lot of control over, and these are the controllables that I think we should be focused on. Milk yield. You've seen a consistent message here, right? I like to see more milk out of our cows. We have more control over milk yield than price. It spreads our cost over more animals. Health. Healthy cows just last longer. They're going to be around when things get better. I think we miss a lot when we have 45, 50% culling rates because we have too many of our cows in first and second lactation. Our cows aren't going to produce as much if they don't ever get to that third and fourth lactation, and that puts a ceiling on our production level. Reproductive management. Break-even milk yield is higher at lower milk prices, so the consequences of not doing a good job with reproductive management are higher. Replacement heifer quality. Dr. Hutchins talked about this earlier. They're tomorrow's future. We need to think about getting those animals calving in earlier. I still see a lot of herds, small herds that I work with, that are 30, 28, 31 months age at first calving. Big herds that I work with, 22, 23. Huge difference on the cost of production. We say, I can't get the cost of production that those big guys get. And then we do things like have our cows calve in at 30 months. Hurts our cost of production. We've got to think about those competitive advantages. Feed costs, huge opportunities through forage quality, byproduct feeds, feed additives, managing shrink, limiting shrink on our operations. And then looking at our asset base. What assets do we have that are not productive? Should we remove some from the operation? Do we have too much machinery, too much land, or too much toys? And where can we look at custom hiring possibilities? I want to finish off by just giving you a little bit of taste of something called lean farming. I recently had an opportunity to become a certified lean farming trainer, and I really think this is the next new thing coming toward us. Lean manufacturing. Anybody ever heard of lean manufacturing? It's used in a lot of business and has been for decades. Now there's a movement toward bringing concepts of lean farming into agriculture. These are the basic principles of lean farming. We're focused on continuous improvement. We're focused on the value to the customer. And in this case, the customer doesn't necessarily mean an outside customer. It means the next stage in the process. So what we do for heifers, the customer is our fresh cows. The customer is our fresh cows. We try to map the value stream and remove waste. We try to eliminate waste. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, okay, this is really ironic because the fat guys up here are talking about lean farming. But let me tell you why a fat guy is the one that should be talking about lean farming. We fat people, we're smart. We think about how many steps it is to the refrigerator. We think about how do I minimize my effort and lean to pick that up off the ground. So fat people are the best people to talk about lean farming because we're thinking lean all the time. It doesn't look lean, but we're thinking lean, all right? So we try to create flow. We're managing the flow through the system, and we go from pushing to pulling. The idea of lean farming is to stop firefighting. Lean farming is to think proactively, plan better. And it talks about removing 8 types of waste. We're not going to go into detail in this, but expect to see things from us moving forward talking about lean farming. There are 8 different types of waste. Defects in the system, overproduction. Dr. Hutchins talked about a sense of overproduction in terms of heifers. That's a huge one for us now. Waiting time. Talent in the operation, not knowing who we have and how we can best utilize. Transportation, inventory, motion. One of the things, for example, very simple. Have any of you on your farms ever spent time looking for a tool? Nobody, right? Yeah. So one of the things that becomes, that's one of the lean principles is to do a better job of labeling tools. And you say, red color means it's for the heifers. Blue color means it's for the lactating cows. And you label things and you make it clear and you post, this is where you're supposed to put that. Simple concept. This isn't rocket science, but really neat stuff to think about opportunities through lean farming, reducing motion and minimizing extra processing. Okay, 2 take-home messages. Be great. If you're going to be a small giant, be great. The next one, and don't forget this one, Biology and business management are not size dependent. We can do the same things in our small operations that they're doing in larger operations. Thank you for your time. I hope you picked up a few new hints. And as Elizabeth said, I'm a resource that I spend a lot of time in Kentucky, Tennessee, and happy to work with you guys any way that I can. Thanks again.